Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. So, Brandon, for the listeners, I think we should probably explain that Tuesday was a little bit of a glitch thing in that, it just didn't work out. Brandon and I, like we've said before, we both have other things we do besides the Mental Advantage Podcast. And sometimes our schedules don't always line up to where it can happen. And that's really what happened. I mean, we try to do the twice a week and we've been pretty consistent with that, but it got to the point. I was talking to one of our listeners that we've referenced before, Chad Hefner, the other day. And I said, believe it or not, we actually do other things besides the Mental Advantage Podcast. He goes, I thought you all just worked on Tuesdays and Fridays.
I tell you what, if that was the case, then we would probably be doing the podcast under a bridge, because I don't know that we'd be making a whole lot of money.
Yeah. We just get random people who walk by. I actually saw a podcast where a guy, this was, I thought, a really good idea for a podcast, is the guy would go to like a college campus or somewhere and he just had two microphones set up, and whoever walked by, the person would just sit down and they became his guest and he just started asking questions to them.
Isn't that how, was it Crowder? I think his last name's Crowder, started, where he would put a sign that said like,
maybe that is
a ravioli, prove me wrong. Or
yes. Yeah. That's funny.
You know what I mean? Like, I do think it's interesting. And here's what I really like about that is that means that someone has something to say, right?
Right.
Because you and I both know, we've been very fortunate and with our guests that we haven't really run across it, but we talk to people and they talk about how sometimes you really have to pull something out, gas or whatever. And, we've been fortunate that we haven't had to do that. So, but anyway, it's,
because Lord knows that would be if the people have to listen to us for the whole time, that's not going to, although I shouldn't say that as we're getting ready to go into one of those shows today.
That's right. So we'll see. But we do have some questions from the listeners.
We do.
Just you and I talking, so that'll be really good.
Thank the Lord, they get some save on that. So,
yes.
Spoiler alert: it is Brandon and I today on the show, and we won't have our normal Friday guest, or I guess this is Friday guest, but we do have a lot of guests coming up next week, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the latter part of the show. But as Brandon mentioned, we do have some Q&A. We always love this. This is at least one of my favorite times of the show, is when we're answering the listeners' questions. So I'll go ahead and get us started, Brandon.
Okay.
We both have some that we've kind of pulled down. I thought this was a really good question from guy by the name of Brian Jernigan from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I don't think we've had a South Dakota question come up, but Brian wants to know, he says, I have started to implement some of the strategies I've heard on your all show, and I have a question. As Brandon mentions all the time on the show, this isn't like weightlifting where you can see the physical changes that are happening. How do you monitor progress to see if it is working? So, wow. Brian,
that is
very good question.
That's a great question.
Insightful. And what I love about this question is the fact that I'm a big, and I know you are too, as coaches, I think this is just one of those things that's in us, is I love to monitor progress with anything. As business leaders, I love to monitor progress. So the fact that he is wanting to implement a strategy and say, hey, look, it's just going to be a strategy if I'm not kind of checking in on it. So, so every so often. So I will just use, and we'll get your thoughts on this as well. But I would say, Brian, that daily feedback forms, I'm a big fan of when you're implementing anything, especially one of these mental advantage strategies or mental performance strategies, is to check in as often as possible early on. So, and I always use the example of E plus R equals O. So everybody remembers event plus response equals outcome. And the thing about E plus R equals O is it's really important that if you're going to start being very mindful of how you're responding to certain situations that are out of your control, and what the outcome of those situations is going to be, that you do a daily check-in at the end of the day. And you don't have to do every single situation that came up during the day, but your big ones. What happened to you that you have no control over? What did you choose as your response to that happening to you? And then what was the outcome of that situation? And just write those down. And then as you go through the week, maybe you'll have, by the end of the week, 20 situations, 20 scenarios that you can say, okay, this happened. This is how I responded. This was the outcome. And like I always say, if you don't like the outcomes, the results you're getting, change your responses. So that's just one example of how you could do that. But I could see, and it's a little hard to answer the question just because we don't know what specific strategy he was implementing. But right. I definitely think there's something to be said for that.
For sure, and especially early on, right, where it like anything else that you're undertaking, there has to be some intentional focus to it. I think for the way that I would answer it is kind of twofold. It's almost like when you're losing weight, right, and people constantly step on the scale, and it's like, guys, the scale shouldn't be that thing, right? That outcome doesn't need to be the focus. It's how do you feel? How do your clothes fit? Right? It's not necessarily about what I'm looking at in front of me, because if I'm having a bad week, does that mean, or maybe I'm bloated, maybe I've eaten something and I really don't know, but I've got some inflammation in my body, or whatever the case is, that doesn't take away from what you're doing. And one of the things that I really would probably lean towards is something that Coach Pete said, last week, right? Which was, hey, we began to get intentional, and the players came to me and almost had this self-actualization of like, hey, I feel better. I'm responding differently. And again, just like anything else, when you start to do that, you recognize those behaviors because they're new to you. And at some point it just kind of clicks and it's second nature. And so I would say, understand what you're doing in terms of your responses, like you said, and just see how it begins to develop, and how you feel about yourself and in various environments and various events, and and be patient, right?
Yeah,
I think there's two things, right? I tell people all the time, like, be patient and have some grace for yourself. Like,
yes,
allow yourself to forgive yourself with things as you're working through them.
And you're not going to find that. I love that you made that point, because you're not going to find that magic button that all of a sudden you say, oh, I heard this on the Mental Advantage podcast, I'm going to start doing this, and it's going to be this way forever. Learning is linear. Learning is not linear, I should say. There are lots of loops to it. So you're going to have, to your point, setbacks. And so really good point there. Okay. What do you got?
Oh, gosh. So one was kind of funny, and actually from somebody over in Cork, Ireland. And and it made me think a little bit. What was the toughest spot you've ever been in sports, like in terms of mentally having to get through something?
Well, I hope the reason you said this was funny was because you were flashing back to my slumbering through, slumbering is probably not a good word, but just absolutely painful experience going through the Spartan race in Wintergreen, Virginia, up at the Wintergreen Ski Resort that I talked you into. I was like, you had done these things, but the fact that I invited you to come basically and watch me be tortured because, and good on you. I always say, had you not been there that day, I probably still sitting on the side of one of those ski slopes because, so to give the listeners a little window into what I'm talking about, we had signed up, or I had saw this Spartan race on line, and I told Brandon, hey, why don't we sign up for this? It's close to the house. You can come up and can watch Mac play. I think he had a football game that weekend. And I said, we'll participate in this thing. Well, it starts at like 10 o'clock in the morning. We'll be done by like 2 or whatever, it won't be any time at all.
Well, and just for the listeners to know, this was a Spartan Beast. This was not a.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Light,
that's right.
This wasn't a little 3 to 6 miler. This was 15 miles on the side of a ski resort.
Right.
And
it's true.
And I did hear at one point as we were crawling underneath the barbed wire, I heard one of the race officials talking to another one and said, yeah, this is the toughest course we've ever put together. And we were about 2 miles in.
So good luck, guys.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about that day, and I will censor this a little bit, but I'm struggling, man, early on in this thing. This is before I'd really got into running or anything, so why not just go and do the Spartan Beast?
Right.
And so I remember being in there and I felt like we had just been doing this thing forever. And I look up and there's a sign. It's like 1 mile. And I remember turning to you and I was like out of breath. And I'm like, 1 mile. Like, I think there's like, 14 of these things or whatever. And you're like, oh dude, don't worry about it. They're just messing with you or whatever, And I'm like, I don't know. All right. Okay. Maybe he's right. He's done some of these things before. So then we go. And I just remember later on in the race, like we come to like mile 2 and I'm like, no, I think that's actually the mileage.
I remember it a little differently. I remember getting up on that mile marker really quick and first mile marker and the second mile marker felt like it was a very long time. And that's when I was like, hey man.
Oh, okay.
You can't pay attention because they are constantly they're going to mentally try to mess with you a little bit. And you're being a little too self-deprecating because you handled that thing very, very well. And a little shout out to Matt because I don't think I was the one that got you off the side of that double black diamond hill. It was Matt because I looked at you at one point and I said, hey, we've got a football game we need to get to. Get your ass up and let's get moving.
That's exactly right. I forgot about that because the other thing about the side of the hill, and guys, when we say side of the hill, keep in mind, imagine a ski slope. So we are literally, as Brandon pointed out, and there's no exaggerating this. You were either going up the ski slope during this race or you were going down in between the ski slopes, but you were never on level ground necessarily.
No.
And I remember laying on this would have been way deep into the race after all the obstacles and stuff and just laying down. I was like, B, I got to just stop. I got to just lay here for a second. You're like, all right, man, take, when you're ready or whatever. And I remember there was like people walking up the hill, the ski slope. And I remember I was like, hey, what time did y'all start? Thinking they were going to be like, oh, we're with you, and we'd pass the people and they're like, oh, like noon or something. Like there were some people who were starting to catch us, like that had started to, catch me because you were kind enough to
there
stick
were definitely
with
people trying to catch us, and they were.
But the good news, and I'm glad that question was asked because I think the message there is that had we, the key to any of those types of races, and any of you are starting to think about even doing like a Spartan sprint or a Tough Mudder or whatever, is you got to really commit to just being where you are in that moment. Like to your point about the mileage and stuff, they are going to try some of that mental warfare, but you just got to stick to the process. And it, I think, is a good example as you look back on it and reflect on it now of, you know what, put your head down, just keep going. Just think about 20 feet in front of you, 20 feet in front of you or whatever. And then eventually you're going to get to your end goal. But if you go into that thing thinking about, well, I want to be, you know, like Dr. Mo would say, I want to be at mile 10, you know, at this particular thing or whatever. You just can't do that. You can't be that futuristic in your thoughts.
Well, you can't, because you truly don't know what obstacle is going to be thrown your way. And the other thing to that I really liked about hearing that was one of your tougher experiences is it also kind of showed you too, you don't have to go through those things alone, right? So from a mental perspective, when you're tired, when you need help, when you need encouragement, hey man, draw upon whatever you need, whether that's your faith, whether it's a friend, whether it's some external thing, because just because they're playing mental war games with you doesn't mean that you can't play it with yourself too, right? To where you're going, hey, it's just one more step. It's one more step. I mean, you hear the folks like David Goggins or a Jocko Willink or, you know, some of these dudes that talk about going through SEAL training. They can't think about the next evolution.
No.
They have to just go one more step, man. Just one more.
Yep.
And like everything else, at some point, what you're doing in those tough instances, it's not infinite. There's an end point to it, and you may not always be able to see it, but it will end at some point, and you will get out on the other side. I love this thing that a therapist told me one time, and he said, you know, God's gotten you through every worst day of your life, every time, because you're sitting here today. You have survived every worst day that you've ever had. And you'll make it through this one or that one or whatever.
Yep.
And so that to me always resonated that, hey, you know, things can get sticky at times, but just, you know, pull on that stuff. And
no, it's a really excellent thing. It's that today plus today plus today equals your goal. Excuse me, is just really making sure that you're, like you said, and understanding that, you know, you're going to get through it. This storm shall pass. Like it's the whole, every storm runs out of rain thing. And we went beyond the Spartan, you know, concept there for a second. What about you? I think I know the answer to this.
Are you going to tell people about, I mean, are you not going to drop?
Yeah. So we're
going to try it again.
We're going to try a similar conquest. Brandon and I are going to do the half marathon in Nashville. Actually, it's going to be the first time you've done. I mean, when you did Peachtree was a full marathon.
Well, Peachtree's a 10K.
10K. Okay.
Yeah, I think at this point I've done.
Oh, I'm thinking of the Disney one, wasn't it?
Yeah, Disney. Yeah, Disney was a full. I think I've done 5 fulls now, and maybe 10 halves.
Dang.
But I haven't. Now listen. I'm telling you right now. So, you know, it's funny because when I'm working out, and we actually had yesterday a workout at the box that I'm at Cummings Strength and Fitness where
name drop.
Yeah.
No free ads.
Yeah, trust me. But we were there, and it was just some 400s, and I remember thinking like, damn. These are 400s. Now, it's a completely different mindset, obviously, and you're doing some other stuff. But it's funny because, you know, when I got done with I think it was the last marathon, I was like, yeah, I think I'm done. I think I've done what I wanted to do with these. So I'm going to skin it back a little bit and see, see about doing something else. But I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it's funny you talk about the mental challenges to any of these goals is already you can start to get into that mindset of like, oh, thinking about, well, the course is going to be difficult, or this is going to be difficult, because outside influence is starting to happen. Like I told Brandon that after I had called you up and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, you want to do it with me? And you're like, yeah, absolutely, like always. And I remember meeting with one of my reps the next day, and I was like, yeah, I signed up for the half marathon in Nashville, and her words, I believe, were, oh, that's brutal. I was like, great. Like, already you start getting these people planting seeds, and if you allow it to, you can start thinking about, that's that whole Dr. Mo message of, it's not the US Open, it's Pebble Beach. Like you have to start thinking about it that way.
Well, and you can look at that as being either discouraging or encouraging for your training that's going to happen over the next 3.5 months. Yep. So, I mean, it's not like we're going out next weekend to do this. I mean, this is, November, middle of November, kind of a thing. So, I'm looking forward.
Invite the challenge. That's no doubt about it. So Absolutely. Awesome. This is a one from Jeff Bean of Madison, Wisconsin. I'm assuming this is, we picked up the Wisconsin listeners from Lauren Williams, guest appearance on the show, being the Wisconsin grad that she is. What are some of your daily routines? So I'll let you have any daily routines that you?
I mean, I think I'm pretty routine driven, from the standpoint of, I'm going to get up, I'm going to try to do the same thing every morning. Get my water in, get some food in me. If I'm not doing some kind of like intermittent fasting or whatever. So I'm relatively routine driven. I've started to pick up journaling a little bit, since that seems to be a very common thread that a lot of our mental performance coaches have discussed. Not something that I've normally done. I think in general, I've had a relatively my outlook is one of gratefulness and gratitude. But it's helping kind of, listing those things out. And then, as with everything, work kind of really throws curveballs at me every day. So as I'm going through work, who knows what the day looks like, but for sure, at some point I'm taking time for myself. I'm going to work out, whether that's going to CrossFit, whether that's getting on a Peloton. Some days it's both. It just, and then, spending time with the family and all that. And we've got practices, and so I've got some routines, but I'm flexible enough to work around them. And I certainly don't allow anything to discourage me or derail it. Right. If I don't get it in today, then
tomorrow's another day.
So I mean, I think it's a great question. And then there's the daily practice and the daily outlook on how you deal with certain situations. And so it would be hard for me to define those as a routine, because at this point, kind of like the earlier question, it's just kind of ingrained now.
So I'm going to give a plug, speaking after I just got done saying no free ads, jokingly, of course, that Full Focus Planner for Jeff Bean in Wisconsin. Full Focus Planner is a quarterly. So this is my daily kind of planner, but it's I stumbled upon it actually online probably about a year or so ago. But the thing I love about this is, number one, it's by quarters, but you can set up, and it gives you these daily things. So it gives you an opportunity to set up your daily rituals. And that's where, and again, just like you just said, I'm not always the master at this, but this is how it forces you to say, okay, what's your morning ritual? What's your workday startup ritual, to flip that mental switch of like, okay, work starting, because you need to be able to do that. Listeners, you need to be able to say, my workday starting. Why? So that you can say my workday's ending, because so often people just continue that workload into the evening with their kids and family and everything else.
Especially now when you're coming on the back end of COVID, where people spent so much time at home. It's very difficult sometimes to draw the line, and where to your point, where does it end? And I love that.
So what I try to do, some mornings are better than others, is I try to start out with some kind of the Brian Cain 5x5 box meditation breathing, where you're just inhaling for 5, exhaling for 5. Spend about 5 minutes doing that. Really intentional breathing just to get kind of in the present moment. Then I usually will do some sort of spend 10 minutes doing some like daily scripture or meditation, something like that, spiritual reading. I'm not great about this, but I do have it written down in my morning ritual as the success hotline, Dr. Rob Gilbert. I try to call in. I have not done a very good job with this recently at all. And then same with daily stoic. I mean, some of those things that I was doing pretty good of reading or listening to. And then the 1% intention of just setting, like, what's the thing I'm going to really focus on today? And then, so that's kind of all that part of that morning ritual. And the whole thing takes maybe about 25 minutes to get done. Then from a workday startup, I do a daily big 3. So it's the 3 most important things I want to get accomplished work related today. And then I'll list out some other tasks. And that's where this quarterly planner is so great, because it allows you every day to have a daily big 3. And then you mentioned the other tasks. And then I'll do like some emails and stuff like that. And then same thing with the workday shutdown and then the evening ritual. But here's what I wanted to get across to people about this question is, whatever your routine's going to be, and I don't care if it's just 2 things you're going to do in the morning, whatever, be intentional and specifically how much time you're going to spend on it. Because as we've talked about before, if you're going to start any routine, you need to carve out that time, and you might have to borrow that time from something you're already doing. So if your breakfast was usually would spend 30 minutes doing breakfast, and that's the only time of the day you're going to be able to fit in a routine, well, the 5 minutes of that you're going to have to steal. Now it's 25 minutes for breakfast and 5 minutes of this other routine. But then the other thing, and this is another Brian Cain strategy, is come up with your ideal week, what it looks like. It doesn't mean you're ever going to hit it, but what you would do, what is the perfect week look like for you? And you can start in generalities from a standpoint of, I'm going to, 8 to 5 is going to be my work day. And then an hour in the evening is going to be for working out, an hour of watching TV, whatever the case would be. And you kind of do this across the board. But it's really good to have that kind of planning to where you can really be that routine focused, because it helps you evaluate, if you will, going back to Brian's question from South Dakota, as progress is you get a chance to see, okay, I'm doing pretty good with these routines. Or to your point earlier, I might not be doing that great with them. And guess what? I'll start trying to do it better tomorrow.
Yeah. And there's some freedom that comes along with that type of discipline, right? There's not a whole lot of wasted energy, decision-making and stuff like that. So that's a really good question. And you are definitely doing a much better job of it, certainly than my daily implementation.
Well, let me tell you, it's the full focus planner, because it does make you be more intentional about it. And again, it's the whole, I feel like Cainer's getting a lot of mentions today, but it's that what gets scheduled gets done. And it's one of those things that even if you think it's not that big a deal, go ahead and put it down on paper, because you typically will do that. And even to the point of like, hey, I'm going to, like we said, at 5:30, that switch is going to be flipped and I'm done with the workday, and it's time for the kids. And I'm going to spend 2 hours on these days with, the kids or whatever the case would be. Okay. So what, another question that came in was from Mike Adkins of Connellsville, Pennsylvania. And I like this question. He says, who is a guest that you would like to get on the show that you haven't had on yet? So anybody come to mind for you?
Well, I mean, there's some big ones, right? Certainly like a Goggins or a Jocko.
That'd be awesome.
Those kinds of guys.
If you're listening.
Yeah. Even like a Josh Bridges. Those types of guys, those types of guys really intrigue me a lot. And the listener can probably hear from my questions a lot of times to these mental performance coaches, because if you know anything about some of those guys I just mentioned, they are very much a mind over matter of an individual. And there's a lot of mental wisdom and toughness there. But that it doesn't come at the expense of kind of who they are, right? Or how they feel. I mean, they absolutely go, hey man, I don't feel like doing this today, but I'm mentally tough enough to persevere. And so I think that's somebody like that. I mean, they would certainly have an open invitation for sure.
No question. Yeah, we might bump somebody if we get that call.
Yeah.
we get that call. No, look, I mean, it's those are some great ones, and what I love is it doesn't matter what perception we have of those folks, thinking, oh, they got it all figured out. Goggins has it all figured out, or whatever. They'll be the first to tell you, Goggins especially. He's always telling you, he's fighting demons, man.
Every day.
And that's exactly what he says. I'm fighting it every day. And so many good lessons from them. I would say, and this is great because a couple of these that I have down, we're going to be checking off the bucket list pretty soon. Alan Jaeger, who Jeremy Sheetinger mentioned last week as one of the titans of mental performance coaching in the country right now. And he is going to be joining us pretty soon. I don't know if it'll be next week, but the week after. Brian Kane, of course, who I went through that training with Brian. He is going to be joining us as well at some point, but it's just been so difficult with his schedule because everybody and their brother is starting to try to get him on. And then you and I have two people in common here. So one is a former teammate of ours who just happened to win the College World Series with his role at Mississippi State, Scott Foxhall, who's the pitching coach, of course, and one of our former teammates at the College of Charleston. Fox is somebody I'd love to get on because you talk about someone who has to, and you and I both know this with pitchers, man. I mean, we could do a whole show just on that mindset of being a pitcher and how goofy some of those guys are sometimes. But you almost have to have a little bit of that to do that role. And when you're the pitching coach, you've got to be that mental performance guy all the time because you're constantly dealing with these guys that are rising and falling with every pitch at times.
And not only that, but when you go out to the mound, you basically have 25 seconds to reset them.
That's a great point. Yeah.
I mean, it's as talented as those guys are, they still need reminders, and you have to know, as a coach, as a parent, who am I dealing with? What do they, how do they learn? How do they listen? What do they need? What kind of feedback do I provide? Do I have to be a rah-rah, pat you on the butt guy? Do I need to stick my foot up there? It's a very unique position. And as a coach, as a guy, I mean, you and I both know how competitive Fox was. I mean, that dude got up on the mound.
But the thing about Fox was, and he was so steady though. Like that was the thing about Fox. You never could look at him. He's got such a great temperament for that position because he was never the rise and fall guy. I mean, he was just competitive. He reminded me a lot of Oral Hershiser in the sense
exactly that, who I was just getting ready to say. I mean, he was that guy. And if you put your hat over your face and you looked out the pinhole on the top of your hat at Foxhall, and you couldn't see the scoreboard or anything else going around, you'd never know if that kid was up by 10 or down by 10 or whatever.
Yeah. You definitely wanted him on the bump, though. I can tell you that.
I was just going to say he wasn't down by 10 often. Not with that 12-6 yacker he threw.
Yeah, no, that he would have a plan. There's no doubt about it. So, and then speaking of our old teammates, is our old I shouldn't say old, our head coach from that time, Ralph Cibiteri, who you and I both just think the world of. He's actually going to be joining our show sometime soon. And I can't wait to have him on because, and we saw some of this last week, Brandon, with Sheets where, yes, the mental performance gave them an edge and it gave them a kind of a process to rely on and get behind and all of that. And they won as a result of all of those things, being skilled players with a good plan and process. But man, when you have that coach that cares about you and is thinking about person first before player, when Sheets was talking about that last week, I know you were thinking probably the same thing I was, is we played for a guy like that. I mean, nobody cared about players more than Ralph Cibiteri.
There's no doubt about it. And I have probably tobacco-stained cheeks.
That's right.
Kisses after games to prove it. So, no, Sibs is a great guy, and I'm looking forward to having him on for sure.
Yeah, no, we'll get him on here, and we'll talk a lot about. Here's somebody who's been at a few different stops. I mean, he was at Charleston Baptist, and which now is Charleston Southern. And then was at, of course, the College of Charleston, but built some programs there. And really, when you're starting those things out, have to kind of be the one who's figuring out what do we want to be about. And then you got to go get players and kind of bring it all together. But that was the thing that our time there, he was really good at establishing families. And I think that was the big thing about our time, no matter whether we were setting the record books on fire for, end of the year records or anything like that. I mean, we had competitive teams there, but at the same time, as we've talked about before, we look back on so many of the off the field stuff, and that's because he had created that kind of a unity in the team.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there was community there. There was, it was his culture. No doubt about that. You can look back and his fingerprints were all over that team. And even now, I'll put it this way. I think it would be very difficult to run across a player that played for Sibs and they didn't know that guy was
right
pulling for him.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it. Yep. Well, listen, first of all, thanks for all the questions. I mean, as we've said before, you guys that take the time to write in, it makes it one, very helpful for us to see what's resonating, what are some of the key topics and stuff. Did you have any other questions that you had pulled out? I think that was it.
I had one, but I would say let's wrap it up. I thought talking about Sibs is a good way to end this show.
Yeah, it's a good teaser for next week. So we're going to try to get him on, and then that'll be good. So thanks for all of you who wrote in. And again, podcast@mentaladvantage.net is the email address. You can reach Brandon at brandon.allen@mentaladvantage.net. And you can reach me at john.cullen. See how it works, right? We're not that difficult. But if you do have any suggestions, questions, continue to send those in. And then also, as always, go and rate the podcast on Apple, on Spotify, and all of the places you can get the podcast. So, all right, man. Well, I appreciate you, and we'll talk to you here soon.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.